Hello, learning nerds, and welcome on in to the nerdiest podcast you're going to hear today. My name is Dr. Luke Hobson. I'm a senior instructional designer, podcaster, author, and instructor. My passion is instructional design, and I consider it my purpose to be able to help you along your instructional design journey. And of course, you can find more information about this show, the YouTube channel, the books, the courses, and everything else over at drlukehobson.com. Now, today's episode is going to be a special episode, and you want to know how I know that? It's because thousands of you told me. Apparently, this is the episode that you have all been waiting for. And finally, it is going to be happening. You can finally listen to two learning nerds talk about instructional design. If you don't know what I'm talking about, first, let me introduce today's guest. We're going to be talking with Devlin Peck. I'm assuming you know that because you clicked on the thumbnail or you downloaded the podcast episode. But when Devlin and I were chatting about what are we going to be talking about inside of this podcast episode, we finally came together with a topic, which I'm going to be getting into in a little bit. But I asked him, I was like, let's take a screenshot so that way we can upload this and we can, let people know that we're finally collaborating, we're doing something together. And okay, totally noted. After 14,000 of you saw that screenshot and there was like 500 likes, a whole bunch of comments and shares, and clearly this is the episode that you've been wanting to see. So it was really cool to be able to see so much interaction and so much excitement built up around this. And my favorite comment by far, by the way, was on LinkedIn and talking about how this is essentially the equivalent of Marvel and DC finally coming together to make some ultimate form of collaboration. So if two learning nerds can come together and talk about instructional design and you're excited about that, then hey, happy to actually make this happen. So what can you expect to hear on today's episode? We're going to be talking more about AI and instructional design and thinking more about how AI is going to be impacting instructional design as far as for our day-to-day tasks, talking more about the industry, ways that AI can actually support us in what it is that we do. And we're going to be talking about many different forms of examples, best use cases and things like that, just to really give you a whole bunch of things for you to be able to take away from this podcast episode and then to go and to actually act upon it. We're also going to be talking to you about the pitfalls and the shortcomings because, of course, AI is not perfect by any means. So we're definitely going to be calling that out too and giving you a little bit more of a warning as far as for where not to go within the instructional design space. And then we're also going to be talking to you about the future. Where is this potentially going to take us within instructional design? And we're also going to be talking more about Devlin's new tool, which is Devlin.ai, which is going to be coming about. So going to be diving all in to that nerdy goodness. And you know what? I'm not going to waste any more time. So here is our conversation with the one and the only Devlin Peck. Devlin, welcome to the podcast.
Hello, Luke. I'm glad to be here.
Absolutely, man. Cannot wait to chat with you and to dive on in to the exciting world of AI and instructional design. But before I get ahead of myself, can you please just introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit more about who you are and what it is that you do.
Sure. I am Devlin Peck, and I run a company where I help people learn new skills and become instructional designers or land new opportunities in the space more generally.
You also forgot to mention that if someone Googles instructional design, all they see is you. Minor detail.
Is that the case? Yeah. But yeah, I started off doing instructional design work myself as a freelancer. I was like really eager to kind of get in there and work from my laptop and travel the world. That was the vision, kind of setting out in this space. And I found out pretty early on I really liked creating content for other instructional designers. So started with some technical tutorials. And then eventually in 2019, a big post about how to become an instructional designer. And that kind of just blew up from there. And that's probably the post that most people would see on that first page of Google.
Say, there you go. Once again, hats off to you, because for an individual to now be able to go on top of like the Google's SEO rankings of everything, where if you type in instructional design, you'll typically see a institution first, and then something about research or whatever, and then there's you. And it's just like every time I see it, I was like, dude, good for him, because this is not easy to do. So hats off to you. All the work you've contributed over here in instructional design land has been really cool. And of course, that's actually how I first heard about you as well too, clearly from Google, but also with YouTube. I mean, you're everywhere pertaining with YouTube. So it's been cool.
Nice. Thanks, Luke. But yeah, I realized early. Like you probably realized too that like video kind of has, yeah, a lot of power to reach people and build connections with people and spread your message, you know, help people learn. So I was so uncomfortable on video, but I like forced myself through that uncomfortable stage to try to, yeah, post on YouTube regularly. And now it's been a main driver of everything, of how people learn about me, of how we reach people. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you're crushing it there, and I'm sure you're going to have 100,000 subscribers by the time this video is out. So, hey, here's hoping for you. But anyway, that's not what we're talking about today. We are talking about the exciting world of AI, because before, when you and I were chatting, talking about how AI, instructional design, our worlds are colliding, and it feels like that's all we can talk about nowadays, because it's exciting, it's new, it's different. Like this is just something that we're all constantly thinking about. I'm curious, what was your first introduction to AI and all of this madness?
My first introduction. I don't know the very first thing I've seen, but I guess I sensed some buzz about it, or I was like this, you know, maybe seeing videos on my YouTube homepage of AI tools that are coming out, maybe other designers posting about AI. So I was like, I need to dive into this and figure out how, you know, what tools are out there that we can use as instructional designers. Like, how is this going to impact our field? I mean, this was maybe at the end of 2022. So I was doing research for a YouTube video. I was like, I'll do a YouTube video, top 5 AI tools for instructional designers. I checked out maybe 20 different ones. And the first time I used like Jasper, for example, and used some of their like creative story generators and stuff like that, I was just like blown away. I like called my wife. I was like, you have to come see this. Come look at this. Like, I cannot believe this. Yeah. And this was like before I had ever seen ChatGPT. So that wasn't even on that like list of tools. But Jasper was like probably the closest thing, and I was just like, this is unreal. Oh, and then Dolly too. Like that was probably the first thing I saw where I was like, okay, wow, this is gonna change things up a bit. It's creating images from scratch. So that's probably where I started, and then branched out from there. But yeah, I thought it was magic. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, and that's what it kind of feels like with everything for AI, and that's why I know so many people are just like wondering, what is this? Because they're like, it is magical. You type in a phrase and you get an answer. Mm-hmm. It's like, whoa, it's data. Like it's really what it is, data generation. Like it's nothing magical, but it definitely does feel that way. And it's so interesting because, and I'm glad you were thinking about it from a perspective about instructional design and AI, because I kind of feel embarrassed to say this, but I was designing AI programs at MIT with my colleagues, and the whole time I was like, oh wow, like AI, this is so interesting. But I'd never thought about it from an instructional design perspective. I was always thinking about it from what they were teaching about, because they had their own lens on things.
Oh, right.
And then, of course, once everything actually does kind of explode, it's like, oh, yeah, I can connect the dots here. There's clearly something that we should be paying attention to. And when this all did come about, I kind of went through some different phases about things. At first, I kind of dismissed it, saying like, maybe it's, I don't know. Some of the things I was reading about too from people also were very much so about saying how AI is like evil. Because there seems to be 3 camps with these things about evil. People think that it's either evil, it's demonizing it, how dare you, plagiarism, you know, all this kind of stuff. Then those on the opposite side, who are the early adopters of technology, and those who are like cautiously optimistic about maybe this is going to be a good thing, but maybe I'll wait and I'll see kind of how this plays out. So were you more about the early adopter reaction of like, let me dive on into this, or were you kind of like, let's maybe not?
I would say maybe on the cusp, like right between early adopter and like slightly cautious. I think that middle ground is probably a safe space to be, but yeah, I think after like months of seeing, you know, just watching AI content and learning about these different tools, like my excitement was gradually building and building and building. And then when I could like fully visualize how it was going to impact people in our field, and I realized I'm like, wow, if there is an instructional designer today who had a tool that like leveraged this technology, but like particularly, you know, specialized for instructional design, if they were like on an instructional design team and they were the only ones with access to that tool, everyone would be like, what are you doing? How are you working at this speed? Like, yeah, we have like a magician on the team. So I realized that I'm like, a tool like this, or a group of tools like this, it's really going to change what an instructional designer is capable of. And that is going to be valuable, and there's no like stopping that or slowing that down. So I think there's there's valid reasons to be afraid, like from the copyright perspective, and maybe even more doomsday, like, you know, AI is going to kill us all, you know, human
Sure.
2.0 or something.
Yeah.
But I also think with how much time AI is saving people and how much money it's saving people, like, it's happening. Like, we can be upset about it, but like companies are going to be using it and getting on board with it because it does massively change like how productive people can be and what one person is capable of.
Yeah, exactly. It wasn't until, funny enough, it was probably in December when I really took like this full deep dive into the ChatGPT world, because a friend of mine who was constantly pinging me about why was I not using it yet. And he kept on saying, he's like, why aren't you doing this? And he would send me articles, and I'm like, I mean, maybe I don't know. And then finally, when he was just like, look at the learning objectives that I just created in 3 seconds. It's like, what do you mean you create learning objectives in 3 seconds? And then that's when he was like, you should just use ChatGPT. Humor me, use it. And then sure enough, and of course, while they weren't perfect by any means, that's what started me down this rabbit hole of like, oh, okay. All right. Now I'm starting to see it. And that's like, aha. What was your first reaction to ChatGPT? We're obviously talking about AI broadly speaking, but ChatGPT is the one that everyone knows right now. What was your first reaction to it?
I feel like I learned about ChatGPT like a few days after I had posted that first video of like top 5 AI tools for IDs. Like a few days later, I started seeing ChatGPT everywhere. And I'm like, what is this? Why is it? It sounds weird. It sounds like something like super technical. But eventually, you know, I watched the video or like went on it and just played around. And first I was like, wow, this is surprisingly easy to get access to. But once I started giving it requests and seeing what it came up with, it was a similar thing. I was like, no way. I like called my wife. I was like, you have to look at this. Or I like generated a text to my wife to like invite her up to where I was like with ChatGPT. But yeah, it was a similar thing. I was like, we're in a new era now of technology and what's going to be possible here. Like, there isn't any going back. No. So that was my reaction. I was like, this is insane. Where is this going to be in 3 months, 6 months, a year?
I mean, and the first thing that I did too, like after all of that, was that, like you, I asked it to be able to craft up a response back to my buddy. To be like, and hey, by the way, can you write to my friend and tell him about now I'm finally using ChatGPT? And sure enough, it's like, you got it. It's like,
I mean, to be fair, when I sent that to my wife was like, what is wrong with you? Like, why are you talking like this? Like, it definitely didn't sound like me. And it was like kind of weird, like sending a formal text like that. But it was still cool just seeing this generating this stuff from seemingly thin air.
I mean, and that has been the one thing that's been really interesting that I've been liking more of Google Bard specifically. Yeah, because we can need to obviously compare and contrast the two. But with Google Bard, whenever I upload something, to be able to say, learn my writing style, and then it points about how I have like these, like there's apparently 5 types of themes that I always use for writing, apparently, as what AI tells me. And I'm like, interesting. Right. So then I say, cool, learn my writing style. And then using my writing presence, I then want you to write X for me, and it's like, you got it. And then it actually gives it to me, and I'm looking at it and like, it's pretty darn believable. Like, it sounds like me. Like, yeah. So have you been dabbling more of Google Bard, by the way, or have you used?
No, not much with Google Bard.
So it sounds more, I don't want to say it sounds more human, because that will make everybody freak out about Terminator, but it does make it seem like it has a bit more of that emotional type of vibe to it, where it's not so strictly has to be like da-da-da-da-da kind of a thing. Yeah. And it's interesting. I've also found too, from going back and forth with Bard in particular, that it does give longer formed answers too, where ChatGPT has like a word count limit. And Google Bard, you can keep on asking and diving on in more and more and more each time. And of course, the other thing which I've been enjoying about Bard in particular is that when you do say, can you cite your sources and give me references, it can. And
it's accurate and
it
valid.
Hasn't been fake
good.
Yet
Wow,
is the key.
nice.
When I've yet to find a fake source, I'm like, okay, maybe we're getting somewhere. So if I can give you one thing after this conversation, it's Google Bard is definitely worth, diving on in a bit more into everything. We talked about a few different ideas about how instructional designers can use AI, but where do you see this being as far as for like what topic could this have the biggest impact for supporting instructional designers? Like what type of area?
Well, I have my hypotheses, but I'm doing research too. Like I have a survey I'm sending out tomorrow to ask a bunch of instructional designers like what they think as a whole about these these things, but I would imagine storyboarding is where it could help a lot. I know that's a time-consuming task for some people. So help, and I guess I mean storyboarding, like also broken down into its component tasks. So even from the learning objectives through to some sort of outline, through to the content itself, even through to animation and programming notes and things like that. So from early tests, it seems like ChatGPT was like doing pretty well with that without me even like doing it step by step. I was impressed when it's giving me programming notes for Articulate Storyline 360. I'm like, okay, nice. So storyboarding, I mean, graphic generation, I guess you could say, like, you know, with like Midjourney and tools like that. I think that can save people a lot of time getting these like custom assets just from coming up with the right prompts and trying them enough times. Those are my two main ones, I would imagine. I'm curious to see what your thoughts are. It might be a little different in the higher ed space, but
yeah. I mean, well, you said it best as far as for saying about trying. That has definitely been the thing, is that I'm going to try to do this way, see if it works. I'm going to try to do this way, maybe it won't. But to give you one example, I'm teaching a class tonight talking about andragogy, and inside of a class, we're going to be doing a live workshop. And I usually do like the same type of topics again, every time I do a workshop on X. Like I know what I want to be able to do, but I just wanted some new ideas. So I asked ChatGPT to give me 15 different ways that I can do an activity with my class tonight about andragogy. Sure enough, it did. And it gave me 15 different things that I could be asking about, different types of tips and what I can do as far as with breakout rooms or describing, Malcolm Knowles' 6 different principles of how you can break them down into different ways. And it did all these different things. And it was pretty interesting. Of course, were they all winners? Absolutely not. Mm-hmm. For some, I was just like, how do you think this could be any form of an activity besides, like, one was like almost like a multiple choice question. I was like, I told you it's a live class. We're doing a webinar. I was like, what do you? No, like that's not going to work. But 2 out of the 15 were really solid. And I honestly could riff off of them and try to be able to brainstorm from some of them. So that's one thing that could see to be able to more about think about a type of an activity, think about a type of an assessment item that we do so much, and eventually you get into the same habit about how you do designs. Because I mean, for me, especially too for higher education, like I love scenario-based learning. I talk about that all the time, but obviously not every single assessment is going to be scenario-based learning, or else it's going to be a super boring learning experience and people are going to kind of, just fade out in the background. So what else can I do using the same content or the same gist of the idea? How can I change that up a bit? And I've been able to do that. So yeah, I
feel like that's like one of the best things that ChatGPT can do, like out of the box without a lot of like fancy like prompt engineering or anything like that. Like using it as like a brainstorming partner and using it to generate ideas for learning experiences, for content. Like I played around with, give me some questions I can answer on TikTok for instructional designers and stuff like that. So idea generation, just like as an umbrella, it's like so good and so fast for that. Just a nice, good like brainstorming partner. And I think that example too emphasizes like how important it is to still have an instructional designer like with critical thinking skills, like at the helm of this AI ship. It's like, it's not going to, everything that comes out of these tools isn't going to be a winner, and it still needs someone with expertise who knows what they're talking about, who can kind of, guide things and, get rid of things and adjust. Like that is still important. So I think that's a lot of the fear too with these new tools. It's like, we're getting replaced. There aren't going to be any more instructional designers. Maybe eventually. Depending on how this stuff like grows, but I would say for the foreseeable future, we're still going to need the instructional designers.
Because right now, to your point, it can design everything start to finish. Like if you, and I kind of want to do this as a test, but I don't at the same time because I think it would freak people out. So maybe I don't want to do this, but I'm curious about building out an entire AI course using only AI.
That sounds like a great video.
Right. I was like, that's what I want to do. And actually to go through with literally everything. So if I wanted to be able to go from the overall goals to the objectives to the entire outline to the various forms of activities and assessments, and like I could, in theory, take all of that, put that together, and then even using a type of a, of a synthetic AI voice as far as with the videos and finding different ways of incorporating that. Like you could in theory do that. But of course, the huge problem with that is that just because there is something that is a form of a done course or training or whatever, it doesn't mean that it's good. Like,
I think
it's
that
there.
would be the thesis. That's what you're highlighting. It's like these tools can generate this, but look at how it is. Like, look at the output. It's not amazing.
It's just like anytime you've taken an extremely boring course or training or program and it just fell flat and you didn't feel any energy from it, and there was no, there was none of that in the background that made you actually want to pursue it more after the first day. That's like what I get. It's like, it's done technically, but it's not good. Like, it's just, it needs love and care. So you're kind of like,
And I think that's how it's going to shake up the industry a bit. I mean, because, I think there are a lot of like course farms out there where we are generating a lot of like maybe average or, not so great, just e-learning products.
Right.
That's going to be able to be, AI is going to be able to create that like relatively soon with minimal human oversight.
Exactly.
So in those cases where it is like, pretty boring, dry, click next e-learning, AI is coming for that.
I agree. And I mean, that's fine. Like, it is.
I think it's good for people overall, everyone except for the people whose like livelihoods depend on churning that out.
Of course.
But I think it does raise the bar, or should, I would hope, raise the bar for what instructional designers are creating.
Yeah, because the stigma around so much about how and this kind of goes into like more debates you see on social media talking about like, oh, anyone can do this, anyone can do that. And it's just like, well, can we actually now take that, as you were saying? Can we really actually showcase our skills and our abilities? Because when instructional design is done right and correctly and given enough time, appreciation, and love, we can design incredible learning experiences. But yeah, if you force us into a pigeonhole and if you give us the deadline of yesterday, then yeah, it's not going to be great. Like, facts. So if we can try to be able to appreciate instructional design more, maybe, this is what I'm hoping, that we appreciate the folks who actually do this for a living more, then maybe we can take our different type of field to that next level. So here's hoping with that. Crossing all fingers and toes there. What's one tip about AI that people aren't talking about enough yet, in your opinion?
Oh, that's a tricky one. Because I see a lot of tips talked about like outside of the ID space.
Yeah.
But I think for IDs, it seems like when they start using ChatGPT, like my biggest tip would be like treat it like a coworker or like someone on your team and like keep the conversation going. I've spoken to a lot of people where it's like they'll give it a prompt and it'll spit something out and then it's like, oh, okay, I have it now. But it's like you can say, oh no, try it this way, or like, oh no, this is what I actually meant, or like, yeah, try again, but use your tone, use a different kind of tone, or give it some more information or context and tell it to try again. So that's helped me get a lot more value out of ChatGPT, is like just treating it like, giving it feedback and asking it for another attempt. And when I share that with some people, they seem surprised. So maybe that's not talked about enough. I'm not sure.
100%. You were absolutely right. That is not talked about enough, because if you look at the end of my screen, if you're going to be scrolling down my ChatGPT or my Google Bard, browser view, and you're just scrolling and scrolling and scrolling, because that's how far down might typically go. Mm-hmm. It is never the one and done. Oftentimes I'll have, if I'm looking for something, it will be 5 different inputs, just going back and forth with AI. So even if it's slightly close, I still say, well, explain that more to me. Describe that in more detail. Can you pitch it in this type of manner instead of this manner? And then can you summarize this? Can you whatever? So it is never just like, looks good first try, and like I'm moving on kind of thing. And it gets pretty detailed. And there's been a lot of videos I've seen online too of people talking about essentially like how to learn anything is where they go into that, and they break it down. So there was one video, and I completely forget if I find it, I'll link to it in the show notes, but it was talking about how it's like, if you want to be able to learn a language, describe for me the basic steps of how you learn a language. And then they would take that and then basically go and like how like a drop down menu essentially to say like, okay, suggestion number 1, break that down for me in 5 steps. And then it lists like the 5, and it's just like, great, now add more detail to step number 3. How do I do that? What resource do I go to? And you keep on going. It gets pretty crazy. Like, it's huge. You're like, okay, now that makes sense.
Yeah. I haven't done a ton with this, but I know there's like the Chat GPT like agents, or like the AI agents, and like that you give it a task and like the AI does what you're talking about. It comes up with all the steps necessary to complete that task and then like breaks them down and starts like executing those tasks one at a time. So it's like you can give it this big kind of fluffy goal or task, and then it will kind of just keep working and keep working and keep working until it completes it. So again, I haven't dove too deep into that, but I know some people are like doing some really amazing things with that.
Oh yeah, no, I haven't used it either, but definitely it's worth looking into instead of the surface level stuff where everyone just posts about a carousel every 3 seconds. Where you're like, it's the same thing. Every carousel is the exact same thing. You're like, okay, but that is definitely one worth pursuing for sure. Hey, folks, real quick, wanted to push pause on today's episode and remind you that enrollment for Instructional Design Institute is still open, and it's going to be open until August 28th. That's when the next cohort is going to be starting. If you don't know what Instructional Design Institute is, this is our 7-week-long instructional design bootcamp, being able to teach you about everything possible within instructional design and designing meaningful learning experiences. Going through with andragogy, how adults learn, to backward design, learning strategies, UDL, evaluating the effectiveness of your online courses and programs. And of course, you're going to be building out your own learning experience inside of this course to be able to use for a portfolio. We're going to be diving on into all of those different forms of topics, along with, of course, that cohort, that community building aspects, just so that way you're not going to be going through this type of learning journey alone. If that sounds interesting to you and you want to be able to take these findings and bring that back to your instructional design team at your university, or if you are an individual who's trying to be able to just learn more about instructional design and you want some hands-on experience, you're trying to be able to craft everything, to build out a portfolio, know about interviews and all that good stuff, well, hey, Instructional Design Institute is right for you. Go down below inside of the show notes or just Google Instructional Design Institute. You're going to see the application, fill that out, and you'll be hearing from me if Instructional Design Institute is a right fit for you. Okay, let's get back to the show. We've talked a little bit about this, and I want to go more in depth about it because obviously AI can deliver. It is great in a number of areas, but also it is not perfect by any means. It's never going to be perfect. That is a humongous footnote for that as well too. And I know for me, going back to learning objectives, even though the first time I used learning objectives and trying to be able to learn from that, well, of course, at the same time, when I asked it to create learning objectives, it used the types of understand, know, learn for those phrases that are not measurable. And you're like, oh, well, okay. Can you revise these to be more specific? Can we talk more about it from Bloom's perspective? Can we add in blah, blah, blah? And it started to get better. And it still keeps on saying other things too that I don't agree with. For instance, which is one I'm sure that everyone else also is just like, it keeps on coming about, is talking about for learning styles. Even if I say don't talk about learning styles, it will put in learning styles somewhere. And I'm like, but why? Like, what are we doing? And then even describing about, can you say the difference about something? It doesn't understand the difference between a case study and a scenario-based problem. It doesn't. It makes them interchangeable. I'm like, it's not really the case. So all that to say is a long way of saying that AI is not perfect. It can miss the mark on a few things. What have you seen from what you've been using around where you're like, oh, that's good to note. It doesn't do that very well.
Yeah, this is always, I guess this is a tricky question. And I feel like the first time we ever spoke, we talked about this. It's like, where does AI fall short? It's like, it feels unfair because it's like such a new technology. And it's like, someone watching this video a year from now, they might not have any of these issues because it is like developing so rapidly. Yeah. But yeah, I think the biggest limitation I see right now is like the context length. So, like in those conversations where you have, you're scrolling down, it's like, it's only going to, at least with ChatGPT, whether it's 3.5 or 4, it will depend on how much context it can hold. But it's like, it's only going to hold the last like few thousand words, give or take. So like that is a limitation if you want it to hold like entire documents. And there are ways around that, of course, with like embedding and more technical stuff. But it's like, I'm excited for when it has like 1 million context length and like you could feed it like a 50-page PDF and start having in-depth conversations about it, and it will like hold everything in its working memory. So I'm excited for that. as far as practical like day-to-day use case limitations, the learning objectives thing, that was one of the first things I tried with ChatGPT, and I think it spit out like an understand this, and I'm like, okay, so that falls short. Similarly with like the image generating stuff, like again, Midjourney is one of those things where it's like from version 1 to version 5, it's like unreal how much they've already improved, and I don't even think it's like been a year that it's been out yet. But it is like prompting Midjourney, you have to be much more like careful and strategic about it, it feels like, than something like ChatGPT. Like you have to like learn the language a bit better, whereas with ChatGPT you can talk to it like it's a human almost, and there are like tricks and tips you can use around that. But I really love that like conversational interface, and it's like not quite there with some tools. It's like you're saying, I'll tell it like, oh yeah, generate a logo with one color and don't include like small details. But then it'll have like, it like won't listen to it, and maybe it'll be like a couple colors with like more details. So it's like, it isn't as precise as if I were asking a human to do that. Like it doesn't understand in the same way, but I think it's getting there, and probably within a year it will be there. I mean, feel like that's my feeling with a lot of these AI tools. It's like, wow, this is like so good. If it was just like a bit further, like an extra 20%, like this would be, we could use this for like everything today.
And we got to timestamp everything for sure.
Yeah.
Because you're right. Because now that we're going to be for open AI, it is constantly evolving. Like there is so much happening right now that, it feels unfair to judge these products on where they are, because you're right. Like, I mean, think about where we were just a couple of years ago. Like it did obviously exist in the background, but we weren't even aware about it. We're not talking about it. The idea of making a podcast episode talking about ChatGPT for an hour is like, what?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
No one would have done that. Do you watch the YouTube video, YouTube channel Yes Theory?
Yes.
Look,
yes theory.
Yes to Yes Theory. It's those guys. It's a group of people, I should say. Now it's not just dudes. It's a group of people who they go around and they travel and they just try.
I know them. Yeah, I used to watch them pretty often.
Yeah. So
I haven't in a little while, but yeah, I used to watch them a lot.
So the whole idea about like seeking discomfort, it's what they do. And if you haven't seen, for folks listening, if you haven't seen it, Yes Theory is a really incredible YouTube channel to watch people take chances, doing crazy things, traveling all the time. But they had a series that when ChatGPT first came about, they actually talked about that in the video. They planned entire trips all around the world based around what ChatGPT gave for a recommendation. And obviously that was a much older version, because that was, I'm pretty sure that was pre-pandemic is when those videos, I want to say, hopefully I'm speaking correctly, this is all from memory, but it was funny because some of the things just made absolutely no sense at all. Like they traveled to Japan and they were talking about how you should ride robots and like go into like mech fighters, and they're like, no, it's not real. like that's from an anime. It's not kind of a thing. But it would say some off the wall kind of stuff where they kept having to change things and whatnot. So when I watch those videos now, I mean, see where we're at now, it's just like, wow, if you wanted to plan an entire trip to Japan, I bet it would be incredible now.
You could, yeah.
You know,
it wouldn't be telling you to ride robots.
It would not
today.
It's not telling you to go jump into mobile, Gundam or anything like that. Like it's not going down that anime road. But it's fascinating to see how far it's come. So it's interesting too, because when thinking about the advancements, of course, you're thinking about this missteps. You also think too, and you mentioned this actually in your recent video talking about use cases with ChatGPT and instructional design. You talked about risks, as far as for like risks and limitations, which is a good thing to bring about, because it definitely, the whole fake citation thing had everybody up in arms, and rightfully so. You feel like you can trust this thing, and then all of a sudden you go and Google and this person's name does not exist, and it's like, yeah, okay, that's that's not great. So okay. But besides everything from a citation perspective, whatever risks have you encountered or other limitations you've seen where you're like, mental note, that's not so great?
Yeah. Speaking of the limitations, that was one of my earliest letdowns as well. I was like using a book for a YouTube video and I was asking for quotes from it, and it gave me a bunch of quotes, but they're all not actual quotes from the book. I'm like, oh, this is amazing. What page are these quotes on? They're like, oh, we can't tell you the page. So then I Googled the quote and like nothing comes up. I'm like, oh, so it just didn't exist.
Oh man, it's crazy. Yeah.
But Other limitations, I think the big thing that like corporate, like big companies are reckoning with is like how to use these language models while protecting their data, especially with a tool like OpenAI. It makes AI so accessible, but then you're using like OpenAI servers, and I think companies like don't want their data touching another company's server. So I know a lot of these companies are like building in-house AI models to, I guess I shouldn't say a lot of companies, maybe like the biggest companies with the budgets to do this are like building their own internal versions. So we'll see how that develops and how big of a limitation that is to adoption in like the corporate space overall. And then I think there's just a really messy kind of question of like ownership and copyright and intellectual property. It's like these models are trained on copyrighted works, and they say anything you generate with these tools, with these models, you own. So yeah, it feels kind of weird. It's like you can tell it to generate art in the style of artists, living artists, or public figures. And then, hey, I own this now. So I have art that looks like something they can make. I generated it in 5 seconds, but it's mine. So yeah, I know there's like some case law coming out. Like there are some cases being heard where, you know, it's like, oh no, you don't actually, no one owns anything generated by an AI tool. You cannot own it. But then there's a lot of arguments like against that. And so it's going to be a lot of, oh, and then I think like these companies are getting sued too for training, for using these like copyrighted or protected works,
yes,
to train their models.
Yeah.
And those lawsuits, I imagine, are going to be drawing out for years or a very long time. So it's in a messy place right now. Like those kind of questions. It's like, I think it feels wrong that is happening. It's like, how is this allowed? How are you able to just take this work that you don't own and use it to train a machine that can generate work just like it? But that is the situation we're kind of in right now.
Yeah, the Getty image lawsuit is the wild one. That, have you seen that? I looked into what that was about.
Potentially, I don't know about the Getty images, but I've heard about like the lawsuits more generally.
Yeah, because for the Getty image one was that people were uploading.
Right.
They were uploading Getty images, like literally directly taking from Getty into, I think it was Shutterstock, and they were like uploading everything, and then all of a sudden there's this like, so here's a problem, like,
yeah.
like they're creating images, and literally had the Getty image logo like in the created type of like new AI artwork, and it just looked weird and confusing.
Yeah.
And that was So that was interesting to be able to kind of read more about that, but that is huge, and especially one of the questions that I keep on seeing people ask about, as you were saying, was like, who owns this? And then, as you mentioned, according to the website, like whoever is the creator owns it, and that's a interesting gray area where you're like, but do I? Because I feel like I could still get sued if I said it's mine, and people are like, no, it's not. Like it's that's open to interpretation right now until I think our courts do decide that, of how does that all play out. So I'm very curious to see where that goes into, because I don't know. I mean, it's just all of this once again to say too is that we are still at just like the tip of the iceberg, which is something, but I think that we really, really need to remember as a society is that we're just getting there. The fact that ChatGPT now is a mobile app that came out a couple of months ago was like, oh, it's finally on my phone. That was the one thing I was constantly thinking about. It was like, in order for this to keep on growing, it needs to be accessible to as many people as possible. Giving someone a mobile device app, there you go. Yeah. So I'm kind of surprised there aren't more apps yet, to tell you the truth, about how to actually go down that path with everything. But speaking of this being the tip of the iceberg, where do you think we're going here with AI? So if I said your next AI video on YouTube a year from now, 2 years from now, what are you hoping to be able to talk about? What are you exciting that potentially could be on the horizon?
Oh, that's a big question. I mean, it's tough because it does develop so quickly. But what I have my sights set on is, and what I'm like even trying to build and starting to work with a developer on, is a tool that's like an AI sidekick for instructional designers that can help with things from A to Z. Like I imagine there is going to be a tool where you can start with a learning goal work your way through the learning objectives, kind of like that video you were talking about, and even end with like finished media, like videos or interactive e-learning, SCORM files or whatever people want. Like there is going to be a tool like that, I'd imagine, that is replacing a lot of that like lower level ID work and relying on the ID for more of that higher level, like critical and strategic thinking, I'd imagine. So in the ID field, like that's like the short midterm, a year is like midterm, I feel like, in this AI space. But like I feel like that's coming down the line, and that's going to shake up the industry a bit.
Absolutely.
I'd imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what I'm excited about and really hopeful, again, crossing all fingers and toes of things, is really thinking about designing learning experiences for everybody. Because we say that, but then you go into things and you're like, well, that's not accessible. And you're like, well, that's not inclusive at all. Or like, this is super, like it's really not. So, I mean, I am super hopeful for having something to be able to help you as far as with UDL, with Universal Design for Learning, but thinking too about accessibility and DEI initiatives and everything of a sort, because I've done a few things that I actually had no idea if it was actually going to even work or not, where I was going to be taking this assessment, but then I asked it to be able to put it into a perspective of a DEI JB perspective, and then it would share with me new ways of modifying the assessment to make it more for everybody. And I was like, oh my God, I had no idea you could do that.
Yeah.
That blew my mind. So I'm hoping that's where we go. And I hope it doesn't take like years. I hope if there's something that's like right around the corner, I'm hoping it's that.
Yeah.
So we'll see.
Yeah. I mean, and then just, I feel like it's going to be more and more common to be interacting with these chat models for a variety of tasks. I mean, I don't know, like outside of instructional design or like professional spaces, it's like, people have like AI girlfriends now, or like AI friends, just like so it's like people are using it for like entertainment. People are using it to help with work tasks. Like I think that people are using it to plan travel. Like people are using it people are using it to figure out where to live. Like my wife and I will like give it all this information and ask, where in this city should we live, or like which city do you think would be the best for us, like in the world?
Oh, really? I didn't know. Yeah. Interesting.
So I imagine that's just going to be more common, us talking to ChatGPT or a tool like ChatGPT for a variety of different tasks, and just like getting used to and comfortable with having like a AI sidekick in our pockets for whatever thing we're working on.
So what did it base around for? And obviously don't say your city, street, or anything, but like what did that base that around, as far as for like with crime rates or with opportunities, or like what did it say?
So what I like to do is I like to tell ChatGPT to ask me questions to make a better recommendation for me. So I'll say like, hey, my wife and I are trying to decide where to live. Like we like vegan food, and we want to be like have a lot of like cultural stuff that we can access, and like a big airport. Before making a recommendation, ask me any questions you need answers to, so that you can make the best recommendation for me. And it will ask like 15 or 20 questions. So then I just type in all the responses, like a ton of stuff. And then it'll be like, here are the three options you might like. And like gives like a paragraph for each and why it might be a good fit.
That's so cool. I'd never thought about that.
Yeah, it was very cool to see. And then it was like, wow, we were already thinking about one of these, and the other two were like, oh yeah, this is like really nice. So
wow. That's interesting. All right, now I have to go into it. Reminds me of the whole like the Facebook quizzes of like, what state should you live in based around your blah blah blah, and you would always take it. Yeah, you always take it, and you're like, why is it recommending this place? And it's like, well, based on what you said, you should go and live in blah. And I'm like, oh. Yeah. So that's interesting, man. I never thought about it like that. Well, I know what I'm gonna do later on today after trying to be able to do that. But I don't want to forget too that you mentioned about this new type of AI instructional design sidekick, which is Devlin.ai, if I'm not mistaken, right? Is that the name of your?
That is it. It's early stages right now. Like I said, I'm doing some surveys and focus groups. I found a developer who can kind of build it as I am envisioning it right now, but I want to build it like with the community to make sure it's like solving real problems. But kind of like what you were talking about earlier, it's like this is a problem. Like ChatGPT, when we're trying to talk to it about specialized, or ask it to do specialized instructional design tasks like the learning objectives, or help us with strategy without talking about learning styles or things like that. I think there's a lot of opportunity there for people in different niches like instructional design to fine tune the models, to train the models, to make it more make it more of a specialist in our field and our niche, essentially. And OpenAI doesn't make it too difficult to do that. Like, they give you access to their API. So they say, hey, you can use this model as a base, the one that everyone can use, but then you can train it with hundreds or thousands of examples of what good learning objectives look like based on these prompts you might give it. And then now when you ask for a learning objective, based on the extra thousands of examples you've given it, it can give you something much more in line with like what the rest of those examples are. So you can basically take the base model, fine tune it even further to make it a better like instructional designer or instructional design assistant. So that's what I'm really excited about. That's what I've been doing, like deep diving into the API docs and thinking about how we would train the model further. But so I'm excited. I'm like, I want to build a more specialized tool for instructional designers because I can see the potential there. But I want to, of course, get feedback from the community and make sure this is something like people actually need and see which tasks people have the biggest need for it to help with right now and stuff. So it's early days. It's just a wait list right now, but in a couple of months, it might look a little different.
Man, that's cool. That is awesome. I'm glad you just shared about that because that would be interesting because the number of times that I have received misinformation and then I said, no, here's the correct information. And you feed it back into everything for the AI. But the minute that you close your tab, it's gone.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, no, like that's no, I just did all this work and it's just disappeared.
Yeah.
So that's cool to actually have like a little buddy to be able to help you out and guide you through that process. That'd be really cool.
Yeah. And I think that's probably what, unless there's a new ChatGPT model that comes out and it just like is by default a specialist in all of these different things. Until that day comes, I'm not sure if that day will come. I think there's a lot of potential for people. Yeah, they're like building these specialist apps that make it more better suited for like sending text messages to people, or to be an AI friend or an AI partner or whatever it is. I think that a lot of people are kind of using the base ChatGPT and then training it further for different tasks. So pretty cool that that's like another possibility. It's like it makes this model very accessible. It's not like you need to be like a machine learning guru to and build this model from scratch in order to, start working with this type of stuff if you're a developer.
I mean, and that's why all the stuff blew up in the first place, was because it was accessible to everybody. And then all you needed to do was put in any form of a tiny prompt and it would give you something.
Yes.
Like that's now why we're all constantly being like, ooh, and like,
so you can just talk to it like
right.
Like it's just a person.
Right.
And it gives you useful stuff. It's pretty amazing. Yeah,
it's cool. Not a person, still, so important note. Still not a person yet until we live in our day and age of cyborgs and androids, which I'm sure will be around the corner before we know it, which is fantastic. Well, anyway, Devlin, thank you so much for your time, for being here, talking about AI and instructional design. This has been an awesome conversation to learn more about what you're doing and what your research has shown us. Where can people go to learn more about you, what you do, the Devlin.ai sidekick? Please feel free to share away.
Sure. Yeah, you can search Devlin Peck on YouTube to find all the videos. We're doing like a big AI playlist right now, AI NID, going through a lot of different tools and how to use them. My website, devlinpeck.com. And then if you are interested in the AI tool, you can go to devlin.ai. Just type that in your address bar and it'll bring you right there.
Awesome. Hey, man, thanks so much again for being here. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate the good questions. And I always love hearing your perspective on the AI stuff too. You're very deep in it, so always good to chat about it.
It's just like your compliment of being like, dude, you have too much time on your hands, or I'm just Googling everything. But yes,
to be spending your time right now.
Hey, I appreciate it. I appreciate it. Thanks again. Well, my learning nerds, I hope you enjoyed today's episode of our deep dive talking about OpenAI. If you did, be sure to reach out to Devlin, say hello, and that you did like this conversation. I was going to say follow him on LinkedIn with his blog, his YouTube channel, and everything else. My best guess is that you probably are already doing that. But if you are not yet so far, and you just heard about Devlin for the first time, be sure to give him a follow and check out more over at his work at devlinpeck.com. And of course, if you got something out of this episode of learning more about OpenAI, be sure to share it. A lot of people have questions right now about AI, where we're going, and trying to be able to demystify this and just let people know that it's not that scary. Yes, there are obviously some concerns, and we talked about them in today's episode, but at the same time too, there's a lot of benefits. There's a lot of positive changes. There's a lot of things that I am really hopeful for about how AI is going to help to transform our learning experiences. So be sure to share this episode wherever you are listening. Of course, if you did enjoy it and you enjoyed it so much that you want to be able to leave a rating for the show, I will not complain in any way, shape, or form. Whether you want to be able to leave a rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you are listening to this show, all reviews are certainly welcome. So thank you very much for that if you do. If you haven't already yet done so, be sure to check out my new gigantic blog post called So You Want to Become an Instructional Designer. 108 pages for free for you. If you go to drlukehobson.com, you're going to find that. A bunch of you have already read that, by the way, which is absolutely just insane to see how many of you really did dive in deep into that one. So thank you if you have already gone into there and to go through. There's a whole bunch of resources and links. I try to be able to craft for you as much as I could share with you about how to become an instructional designer and to talk about things that people aren't talking about with forming habits, with studying techniques, and then, of course, the things we should be talking more about with instructional design models and theories and frameworks and processes and all that good stuff, and a few other things as well too. So I hope you enjoy that type of free resource. And last but not least, if you want to be able to learn from me and to go through our instructional design bootcamp, be sure to apply today to Instructional Design Institute. This is definitely by far the nerdiest type of bootcamp that you're going to see, with diving on into all the different forms of instructional design and designing learning experiences. So be sure to do that today. But hey, folks, that is all I really have for you. Thank you so much for listening. And as always, stay nerdy out there. Talk to you next time.